When she handed him her letter, he recognized his own sister's handwriting. The envelope was worn soft at the corners, the kind of soft that comes from being handled. Not red-handled, carried close. There's a difference. I know because I'd had a letter of my own like that once, a long time before, and I'd worn it down to almost nothing just from keeping it near me, taking it out and putting it back without ever opening it again, because I already knew every word and they still hurt the same every single time. I noticed the envelope before I noticed the woman. She was sitting at the far end of the porch at Haskell's trading post, on the bench outside where folks waited for the stage or for news or for nothing in particular. The boards there were gray and cracked and the whole porch listed slightly toward the road, and she sat very straight against that list like she was correcting something. The envelope was in both her hands in her lap. She wasn't reading it, just holding it. I'd written in for flour and a tin of coffee and maybe some salt if Haskell still had any that wasn't turned. It was late October, cold enough that my breath came out in small puffs, and the horses out front were restless, stomping and blowing. I hitched my roan to the post and went inside without looking at her again. Haskell was behind his counter doing what he always did, which was very little. He had the flour and the coffee, and he did have salt, 3 tins, even, and we went back and forth on price for a few minutes the way you do when you've been trading with a man long enough that the haggling isn't about money anymore, it's just something to say. I paid what he asked in the end. I always did. He knew it and I knew it. When I came back outside with my goods, she was still there on the porch. And that's when I saw it, the handwriting on the front of the envelope. I stopped where I was. My heel caught the edge of a board and I nearly went down, not from the catch, but from stopping so sudden. The way you stop when something passes by the corner of your eye that your mind hasn't caught up to yet. The envelope was addressed in handwriting I knew. I knew it the way you know your own face in water. Not because it's beautiful, but because it's yours, because you've been looking at it your whole life. The long looping E the way the capital H had that second hump that tilted out to the right, like the letter was leaning to hear something. The particular slant of it all, east to west, like everything written was bracing into a wind. That was my sister's handwriting. My sister Clara, who I hadn't seen in 11 years, who I'd been told and had half believed when there was nothing else left to believe was probably dead. The woman on the bench looked up and she caught me staring. She didn't flinch from it. She just looked back at me steady, the way people look at you when they're used to being stared at and have decided they won't be ashamed of it anymore. I said, "Where did you get that letter?" It didn't come out like a question. I don't think it was one. She said, "It was given to me." I said, "By who?" She said, "By a woman named Clara Voss." I set my goods down on the boards right there, just set them down. Haskell's flour and his coffee and his 3 tins of salt. I sat down on the far end of the bench from her. My legs weren't working right. I put my elbows on my knees and I looked at the road. After a while I said, "Clara Voss was Clara Aldridge before she was married." The woman said, "Yes, I know." I said, "She's my sister." The woman said, "I know that too. She told me to find you." I need to go back some to explain what it meant, someone telling me that, what the finding me part of it meant. I've been in the territory about 6 years at that point. Before that I was in Kansas, and before Kansas I was in Tennessee working horses for a man named Pollard who didn't deserve the horses he had, and before Tennessee I was somewhere. Drifting is the accurate word, but it sounds romantic when it wasn't. Drifting is what you do when you've stopped caring enough about any particular place to stay in it. When every road out looks about as good as every road in. I lost my sister in '67. That's the clean way to say it. What happened is longer and worse, and there were men involved who don't deserve naming here and a debt that wasn't mine that got treated as though it was. Clara was 22. I was 28. We had nothing left by then except each other. Parents were gone, the farm was gone, that whole life was gone, and then she was gone too. Taken isn't the right word. Sent away is closer. Sent away by a situation I couldn't stop, to a place I couldn't follow, to people I couldn't get near. I tried. That matters to me, even now. I tried for 2 years before I understood that trying wasn't going to be enough, and then I tried a while longer after I understood that, because understanding a thing doesn't mean accepting it. Then eventually I did what men do when they run out of ways to fight a thing. I moved on. That's what we call it. Moving on. Like there's some other place you can get to where the thing you couldn't fix isn't still sitting in you like a stone. I'd been moving on for 9 years, when I rode into Haskell's for flour and coffee. The woman's name was Nora Beaumont. She told me that after she told me about Clara. She was maybe 35, maybe 40, hard to say exactly, not hard-looking the way some women get when life has been rough with them, but precise. Like she distilled down to something essential, and there wasn't any waste left to her. Her hair was dark, and she had it pinned up under a brown hat that was a man's hat, not a woman's, and her coat was heavy wool, and her boots were practical, laced high. She was carrying a satchel beside her on the bench that had the look of something that had been packed carefully and lived out of for a good while. She said Clara had been living in a town called Garvey up in the north part of the territory, had been there about 4 years, working first as a cook for a boarding house and then later as the proprietor of it when the owner died without heirs. She was alive, Clara, she was well. She had 2 children, both hers, a boy of 6 and a girl of 4. The man she'd married, this Voss, had died the previous winter. Fever. She'd been well enough without him, Clara. She'd run the boarding house. She had the children and she had the work and she had a life. Then in the spring of this year, somebody had come through Garvey who recognized her from before, from the old business she'd been sent into, and they'd started making noise. The kind of noise that in a small town gets louder fast, even when the things being said were things done to you and not by you. Clara had written Nora because Nora had been, and here Nora paused and chose her words, she had been in a similar position herself some years ago in a different town, and she had found a way out of it, and people knew that about her, that she had found a way, so sometimes women wrote to her. I said, "What does the letter say?" Nora said, "It says she has a brother. That she doesn't know where you are, but she thinks you're somewhere in this territory because someone saw a man who matched your description at a land office in Bitterroot 2 years ago. It says to find you if I can. It says." She stopped. I said, "What does it say?" Nora looked at the road. "It says she's afraid, but it says if you're the man she remembers, you'll know what to do." I had to look away from her when she said that. There's not much that gets through whatever I built around myself in those 9 years of moving on. But that did, not the fear part, the other part. If you're the man she remembers, you'll know what to do. I sat there for a while with my hands loosely together between my knees and the cold coming off the road, and a dog barking somewhere down past Haskell's, and I tried to figure out if I was still that man. Nora Beaumont had been on the road for 3 weeks. That's how long it had taken her to track me down from the description in Clara's letter. She'd started at the land office in Bitterroot and worked outward. She'd talked to a lot of people. This was, I came to understand, something she was good at, talking to people and getting them to tell her useful things without quite knowing they were doing it. She had money enough, not much, but enough. She'd been careful with it. We sat on that porch for maybe an hour. The stage came through and some people got off and Haskell came out and talked to the driver for a while, and the whole ordinary business of the afternoon moved around us, and we just sat there and I asked her things and she answered them, and gradually I got the shape of it. The situation up in Garvey, Clara's situation. It was fixable. That's what I kept turning it over to see, whether it was fixable. A man spreading poisonous talk about a woman in a small town, that's not a novel problem. What made it dangerous wasn't the man himself, it was the particular thing he knew and the particular people in Garvey who might decide, if the noise got loud enough, that it was easier to run Clara out than to deal with the noise. I knew people in Garvey, or I knew people who knew people. And there were some legal mechanisms. There were things Clara owned now, the boarding house property, that, properly documented, made it considerably harder to move against her. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not much of anything, technically speaking. But I've spent my adult life watching how power works and doesn't work in small places, and I know some things about leverage and about what men respond to when they've decided to be petty and cruel. Sometimes you meet it with force. Sometimes you meet it with paperwork. And sometimes you just need someone to stand up in a room and say a thing plainly, in a voice that makes it clear they're not going to unsay it, and that's enough. I said to Nora, "How soon do you need to leave?" She looked at me. "How soon can you be ready?" I said I'd need a day to settle some things. My horse needed shoes, and I had a few obligations I had to arrange around. She said, "I'll be at the hotel. Haskell will know which one." I said, "It's a 2-day ride if the weather holds." She said, "I know." I said, "You been to Garvey before?" She said, "No." Clara described the road. I looked at her. Clara hasn't seen me in 11 years. For all she knew, I was dead. For all she knew, Nora said. But she didn't believe it. She told me if you find a man named Cal Aldridge, he won't turn away from this. He's not built for turning away. I picked up Haskell's flour and his coffee and his salt. The boards creaked when I stood. I said, day after tomorrow before light. She nodded. She folded the letter back into the envelope and put it in her coat. The ride north was cold. That time of year in the territory, you get these long gray stretches where the light never quite arrives and never quite leaves, just sits on the land at an angle and makes everything look like the day after something. The grass had gone blonde and dry, and the wind moved through it in waves. Nora Beaumont rode well. Better than well, she had a horse of her own, a gray mare she was clearly easy with, and she kept pace without effort and without comment. Some people who are comfortable on horseback feel the need to demonstrate that they are, to canter ahead or show you the animal moves under them. She didn't. She just rode. The first day we talked a fair amount. I asked her about herself, which was not something I'd done in a while with anyone. She'd been born in Ohio, she told me. Moved west after her husband died. She'd been widowed young, very young, 20, and she'd had no family left to go back to after it, so she'd gone forward instead. She'd landed in rough places. She'd figured out how to be useful in them in ways that didn't destroy her. Eventually, she found herself being sent letters by women like Clara, women who needed help that most people didn't know how to give, and she'd started to understand that that was the work she was supposed to be doing. "You make money at it?" I asked. "Sometimes," she said. "Sometimes people can pay, sometimes they can't." "And when they can't?" "Then they can't," she said, like it was very simple. I thought about Clara writing that letter, taking out paper and dipping the pen and writing it, the long looping E, the tilted H, not knowing if it would find anyone. Trusting that Nora would try, and that if she tried she might find me, and that if she found me I'd be the man Clara remembered. I'd like to think it said something about me, that Clara still believed that after 11 years. But honestly it says more about her, that she could still believe that. After everything that had been done to her and everything she'd had to do, she could still write a letter and mean it. The second day we didn't talk as much. The land got harder, more broken up, ravines cutting through the plateaus and stands of pine starting to thicken as we went north. Colder. My breath and the horse's breath clouding up constant in the air. Nora had a heavy coat, and she'd wrapped a scarf up around her jaw, and there were long pieces of the ride where I could only see her eyes above it, brown and steady, watching the trail ahead. We stopped at midday at a creek to water the horses and eat a little. There was ice at the creek's edges, but the middle was still running clear. I broke the ice with my boot heel to let the roan get to it. Nora's mare found her own way in. We ate without much ceremony, hardtack and dried meat, the kind of eating that's just fuel and nothing else. The trees cracked around us with the cold. Nora said, "She talks about you like you hung the moon." I said she shouldn't. Nora said, "That's not for you to decide." I looked at her. "She was 22 when you lost her," Nora said. "You were 28 and you'd already lost everything else, and then you lost her too, and from what she says, you tried everything you could think of to stop it. And then you kept trying after that, and she knows it." She picked up her canteen. "She told me that what she's been most afraid of all these years isn't what happened to her. It's that you've been carrying it the wrong way, blaming yourself for something that wasn't yours to stop." I didn't say anything. "She's not fragile," Nora said. "I want you to know that before you see her. She's clear-eyed and she's strong and she's built a life. She has 2 children she loves and a business she runs well. She doesn't need saving. She needs some help with a specific problem and she needs her brother." She recapped the canteen. "Those are 2 different things." I said, "I know they're different things." "Good," Nora said. She stood and gathered her things. "Let's get moving." We came into Garvey just before dark on the second day. It was a working town, not a fine one. Lumber operation on the north edge, a few streets of respectable buildings, a church with a patched steeple. The boarding house was on the main street, 2 stories, with lamps already burning in the downstairs windows against the coming dark. I didn't know what I expected. 11 years is long enough that you stop expecting anything specific, because the specific thing you lost has been replaced in your memory by the idea of it, the way a word you say too many times stops sounding like itself. Clara. I'd said it in my head so many times it had stopped sounding like a person's name. But then the door opened, and she was standing there. She was older, of course, 43 now, the same age I am. Her hair had gray in it at the temples, and her face had the lines of weather and work, and I don't know, living, the lines of living. But she was there, she was herself, she was Clara, and the thing I thought in that exact moment was not something I can describe with much accuracy other than to say it was like something that had been wrong for a very long time was suddenly correct. Like a bone set back. She came down the steps fast, and she grabbed my arms above the elbow with both hands and held on. She wasn't crying. Neither was I. There's a kind of reunion that happens after long enough that it's past tears, past that. It's more like checking, making sure, running your hands over the edges of a thing to confirm it's still real. I said, I heard you had 2 children. She said, boy and a girl, they're asleep. I said, you're all right. She looked at me, still holding my arms. I'm fine. Are you? And that's the question I hadn't been ready for. Are you, not how are you, the greeting question. Are you? The Clara question, the one she'd been asking me since I was a kid, and she could tell when something had gone wrong, the one that means, are you, specifically, actually in there? I said, I think I might be, and then, because that wasn't enough, I'm working on it. She nodded like that was the right answer. She let go of one arm and turned, and the arm she still held she kept, like she was towing me up the steps and into the warmth and the light, which is what she was doing. Nora came up behind us with the saddlebags. We stayed 2 days. The situation was what I'd thought it was, and the resolution was also roughly what I'd thought. The man causing the trouble was a blustery type who turned out to be considerably less blustery when confronted directly and out of the range of his audience. Clara had more community standing than she'd understood, the people at her boarding house, the families who'd eaten her food and slept in her rooms and been treated decently. They didn't move against her when given the chance. They stayed. The noise died for lack of anything feeding it. There were some documents drawn up with the help of a land attorney who owed a man I knew a favor. That formalized things regarding the property in ways that made casual interference legally expensive. I won't pretend it was elegant, because it wasn't, but it was enough. On the evening of the second day, Clara and I sat at her kitchen table after the children were in bed. There was coffee, and there was a candle, and the house had the sounds of a house with children in it, the particular stored warmth of that. I'd carried a tin cup of coffee to Nora where she was sitting in the front room reading, and then I came back and sat down across from Clara. She said, you look tired. I said, I am tired. She said, you've been tired a long time. I said, yes. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. Cal, you know nothing that happened was your fault. I said, I know. She looked at me. I know, I said again, and then, I'm still working on believing it. She reached across the table and put her hand flat over mine, just held it there. Her hand was rough, the hand of a woman who ran a business and cooked for 20 people and raised 2 children alone. Strong hand. She said, there's something I want you to do. There's going to be a lot of work here in the spring when the lumber season starts up again. I could use somebody I trust helping manage things. You don't have to stay permanent, but I want you to think about it. I said, you've been managing things fine without me. She said, I have, but I want you around, that's different. She turned my hand over the way she used to do when we were kids and I'd hurt myself, turning it to look at the damage. There was no damage now, just my hand, roughed up by years of weather and work, same as hers. She looked at it a long time. I wrote Nora because I trust her. Because she's helped women like me and she's good at what she does and she's a straight-dealing person. But I also wrote her because I thought, she paused. I thought maybe she'd find you and you'd help with this, and then maybe something else would happen too. I said, what else? Clara smiled. She looked like my mother when she smiled, which is a thing that still catches me off guard. I don't know, I just thought it might be good, for both of you, being around a person who knows how to find the lost ones. She went to bed not long after that, and left me sitting at the kitchen table with the candle and the quiet. Nora was still in the front room. The lamp was low and she had the book face down on the side table, not reading anymore, just sitting. I went in and sat down across from her. I said, my sister wants me to stay through spring, to help with the business. Nora said, what do you want? I think I want to stay, I said. I haven't wanted to stay anywhere in about 9 years. That's a thing I'm aware of. I looked at the lamp. She also seems to think there might be some use in you and I being acquainted. Nora looked at me. Her expression was very even. Clara mentioned that to me as well. Did she? She said, Nora stopped. She said you were a good man who'd been carrying something heavy alone for a long time, and that the right person could see it and it wouldn't scare them. I said, and do you? I see it, she said. It doesn't scare me. The lamp gave a small flutter. Outside, the wind was picking up, coming down off the hills. I said, I don't know how to, and then I stopped because I wasn't sure what I was trying to say. How to do this. How to be a person again, maybe. How to be in a place and not already be planning which road out. Nora said, you don't have to know, you just have to stay. There's a quality some people have that I don't have a good word for. Steadiness maybe, but that's not exactly it. It's more like they've been through the thing that undoes people and it's made them simpler rather than harder. Clearer. Like they burned off everything that wasn't essential and what's left is just them, just the actual person, no performance of one. Nora was that. I'd been watching it for 2 days on the road without naming it, and sitting there in the lamp flicker, I named it. She was looking at me the way Clara had looked at my hand, taking stock, not pity, not softness for its own sake, just seeing what was there. I said, I don't know what use I'd be to you. After this, I mean, what I have to offer. She said, you're asking the wrong question. I said, what's the right one? She said, it's not about what you have to offer, it's about whether you want to be known, by someone who won't look away. The wind moved against the windows. I could smell the wood smoke from the stove and the particular cold that came through old frames, not enough cold to be uncomfortable, just enough to know the world outside was hard. I said I would like that. She nodded. She reached over and picked up the book again. Not because the conversation was over, but because some things don't need finishing, they just need saying, and we'd said the thing. She read, and I sat, and the lamp burned low, and that's where the night went. I'm writing this, or I'm saying this, however you want to think about it, from the front porch of Clara's boarding house. It's March now. The cold has started giving a little during the afternoons. The mud season is coming on, and pretty soon the lumber men will be coming back, and things will be loud and busy, and there will be a great deal to manage. Clara's boy, whose name is Henry, has decided I'm interesting. He follows me around some. He's 6 and he has his mother's particular set of jaw, that same corrective bearing, and about once a day he tells me something he knows as if he's been waiting to tell someone. Yesterday he told me the names of 4 different birds. The day before it was something about how rope is made. I don't know where he gets this information, but he delivers it with great seriousness, and I take it seriously back. I'm trying to say what this is. It's morning and the light is doing that early spring thing where it's still low and clear, not the full bright of later in the year, just an angle of it coming across the land, lighting up the frost still on the grass, the mud tracks in the road, the horses at the fence of the livery across the way. Nora came out about 20 minutes ago. She had 2 cups of coffee and she put one in my hand and she stood at the porch rail beside me and we didn't say much. We looked at the morning. Her shoulder was against my arm and neither of us moved away from that. I've been thinking about the letter, the one she was holding when I first saw her, worn soft at the corners from carrying. Clara's handwriting on the front, the particular slant of it east to west, bracing into wind. I don't know how many years I moved through this world like a man with no address, going where there was work and then going somewhere else, not running from anything specific anymore, just empty of the thing that makes a place, which is somebody knowing you're there and it mattering. Clara wrote that letter without knowing if it would find me, without knowing if I was the man she remembered. I think I am. I think I might be again. Nora is pointing at something out past the livery, her arm out, her finger extended, and she's saying, "What kind of bird is that?" Which is a thing she has taken to doing since Henry started doing it, asking what kind of bird, and neither of us knows the answer most of the time. I'll have to ask Henry. He'll know. The frost is burning off the grass. The coffee is warm in my hands. Somewhere behind us in the kitchen, Clara is starting the fire for breakfast, and the smell of it is coming through the door. I stayed.